We are facing very tough times in our society. I work with strategic planning for more than 20 years, mostly applying to food and agribusiness companies, and I can tell you that I've never seen such a change in the environment as I saw in the last 60 days. If we look at reports from banks, from the international consultancy companies that we read in December, we haven't seen this scenario. We haven't seen oil prices below $20 a barrel. We haven't seen exchange rates how it is today. So it's incredible what I saw in the last 60 days. So the idea of this video is to share with you my feelings, my thoughts, in order just to try to help to see what may happen, what are the behavioral changes that we're facing in society, and if this video can help you to take your decisions, I'm gonna be very happy. So this is the idea here, is to share and start a dialogue, because this is probably my first video in this direction, and I want to produce much more in order to be in touch with the global food, agribusiness, and biofuels community. So if you want a written piece of my speech here, you can find in this article that was published around 15-20 days ago on China Daily, talking about the possible impacts of the coronavirus situation over food and agribusiness chains, giving the taste or the feelings of what's going on in Brazil, so you can take a look if this will happen or is happening in your country, and even how can we work together with governments, private sector, to think in solutions, because we want to get rid of this situation as soon as possible with a smaller the number of people that gets hurt. We don't want business getting shut down, so this is what we should avoid. So now it's a wonderful time to work together, scientists, private sector, government, in order to anticipate what may happen and try to solve, try to reduce the negative impacts. So in order to make it easier, I produced a one-page, one chart resume of the possible impacts, things that we are seeing, and how can we try to anticipate, and how can we act in order to minimize the losses of the communities. So what you see here is a chart that I'm calling the impacts of coronavirus in food and agribusiness, and I divided in two sides. In one side you can see what I raised as a possible business or things that will stay the same or may even benefit. And then we have on the other side the losers of this situation that need some support, need some help. So first thing that we saw is a devaluation of the currencies of most emerging countries. So Brazil had a strong devaluation of the real. $1, now we need more than 5 reais to buy $1. And again, if you look at the reports in the end of the year, there was no report telling that such a devaluation could happen. But in some sense, devaluation of a local currency, if you are export-driven country, gives a relatively positive impact, because the price of the commodities in your currency is a little bit higher than it was with your currency with more value. So this was a possible win for agribusiness and for local companies, because now the imported products become a little bit more expensive and they have a little bit, let's say, more margins to compete. We have in Brazil, and I think in most part of the world, lower interest rates, but capital is afraid. Banks are afraid of the situation going on. So the money, in certain sense, disappeared. It's a problem that we are facing now. Even with low interest rates, people are afraid of lending money and making things move forward. Supermarkets In the first stage, they benefit with the crisis. They had sales like in Christmas times because people bought some inventories at home. But now the situation is quite controlled, but they were a winner in this situation, and we could see this almost all over the world, hiring more people, opening opportunities, starting their own delivery systems. So we've seen an explosion of companies going to digital and starting their delivery systems in order to match the consumer isolated at home. This was a big gain for business because this will stay after the crisis. For meats, there was a gain at the beginning, mostly in the cheaper ones, because people going home, they had a chance to eat more, to prepare more. But the higher end, the more sophisticated meats lost a little bit of share because the problem of income, of people losing jobs and others. But we have China coming more and buying, because you know China had the issue of the virus before than we are having here in Brazil, so they kind of consumed part of their stocks while the ports were closed, and now China is coming strongly to originate meats, and also because of the fact of the pork swine fever that's still getting worse, and also the issue of probably changing consumer behavior that we're going to see in China and other Asian countries, maybe eating less these exotic animals that created probably the problem for all society, and going more to the traditional meats. So I think this may be positive trend in the midterm. For soy and corn, we have a good situation now in Brazil because we have a record production coming, 252 million tons, and the prices in reais are relatively okay, and farmers are investing, so they are working, they are harvesting, planting, taking care, so these crops are moving well. We had also others that stayed the same or had some benefits, like the highly nutritious foods, and here we can call attention of eggs and others that gained market because of immunity and more nutrition of population. One product that had a nice gain was the orange juice, because people went to try to raise their immunity with vitamin C, and orange juice is a liquid food, and it gained market share again over other beverages that it was losing in the last 10 to 15 years. And I think this will stay because people can trust in the vitamins and need more immunity, and we are going to be much more paying attention to nutrition after this terrible situation that society is facing. Coffee gained also. People are having more coffee at home, but we have to check what can be the impacts. The impacts when people stop having the specialty coffees in the cafeterias and other food service that are closed. So this is a kind of a mixed balance that we should pay attention in the case of coffee. Pulp and paper, that's another food and agribusiness product that had a gain because of sanitary markets growing. So the paper with alcohol and all types of cleaning tissues and things like that improved the sales of this industry. We have today a problem that is and Brazil may benefit, and other exporting countries may benefit, because we have a threat of a global shortage of food, because some facilities are having to shut down due to the reason of contamination of their employees. We heard that in the US, some slaughterhouses are having problems, and this may represent an opportunity also to export more if these problems continue, and if you have to keep more time these units, very important units, shut down. So I think there is, yes, a threat of a global shortage. Some countries are banning exports, And for Brazil that has plenty capacity and has excess food inside the market, this can be an opportunity also in the global agribusiness environment for the next half year or even more time. So we've seen in the last couple of days a lot of countries coming and starting the negotiations to import food from Brazil, benefiting some slaughterhouses, doing the agreements, and I think this is something that's coming to stay, representing an opportunity to consolidate Brazil as a very important global food supplier. To counterbalance the problem that people will have with their income, we have the governments putting money mostly for the more poor people, and this money probably will be spent in food. So I think this will kind of balance the problem that we have in income being destroyed in most of the countries with the public support for people to buy food. This is what I put there as expenditures from global governments. Here in Brazil, and I think in other food producing countries, what we've seen is a wonderful growth of the image of the farmer, of the food industry within our society. Because when they saw crises all over the world, they saw crises of empty supermarket shelves. Here in Brazil, the supply was working perfectly. Supermarkets were full of foods, full of vegetables, and even with the threat, agribusiness kept on working and society paid attention. So I think we have, if you compare the last 60 days, the image of the food and agribusiness industry within our society, and even within very aggressive environmentalists against the industry, the image went up, and there's going to be much more tolerance now because people see that the pollution is created by our lifestyle in cities and not in our farms, because the cattle is still there, milk producing is still there, and we can see clean air, we can see the sun, we can see the birds. So the problem is in a urban society much more than in agriculture. So I think for the environmental issues, we're going to go through a next stage now of more respect to the farmer and to what's being done in our food production activities all over the world. We have a lower cost with diesel. You know, diesel is an important cost component of agriculture for the operations, for the transport, and because of oil prices going down, we have a lower cost of diesel, and this will help also the agricultural activities. What I could see, and I'm going to merge these two items, efficiency in management and digitalizing of operations, because what I saw in 30 days was what I was expecting to see in 3 years. So the digital went in a huge speed all over the organizations, learning to do the home office, learning to do digital meetings, and I think this will bring a huge gain of efficiency. We don't need anymore those large offices full of people, and we're going to go to a new behavior of simplicity. What I saw these days in terms of creativity, of apps, of solutions to problems was incredible. New apps came to connect horticultural producers with clients, no intermediaries, and then you have a specific company doing the transport. Apps connecting truck drivers to the ones that need transport of cargoes. Incredible how we gained efficiency in these 30 days with the new digital life that came to stay. And I think we're going to have as a benefit also of this situation a new wave of solidarity and inclusion in our society, and in my view, cooperatives, associations tend to gain market share because of this new behavior in society. So this would be, I wouldn't say positive, but things that can improve, or business that kind of survived during this situation. Now we go to the worst part, the ones that suffered, and the situation that this crisis created. Of course, serious damage to health and people, physical and psychological also. We're not counting on this, but the amount of people that, you know, lowered their capacity of working, having problems because of the isolation. This is a huge damage that we created for international society. The world GDP probably going from +3 to -5. In Brazil, we were expecting to have a wonderful year in terms of economic development and growth, and now going backwards again. So this is a very bad news for the producers, for the ones that are involved in building products, building services to sell. We have probably the global trade will shrink from 5 to 30%, depending on the reports that you read, and lack of confidence. So when you have less trade, can you imagine you have less transport, less activity in ports, less services? So it's a chain of destruction of opportunities. Very sad also. In some countries and in some areas, we have a chance of some food security policies coming back. So trust in trade is something that we have to reconquer, and this may be negative also for agribusiness. We have a movement of the state coming back and doing some services that the private sector won't be able to do because they will bankrupt. So for the ones that have a mindset more liberal and the state taking care of the things that the state performs well, we went backwards because we're going to need the state again doing some activities in areas that I don't think the state is efficient. So we have to pay attention. We have to do this as a very short amount of time, and the state has to get out as soon as possible, leaving the private sector to work. We had some problems of partial interruptions of some production chains. I've already told this in some countries as a negative impact for agribusiness. A disaster, a complete disaster for the services sector. And here we talk about food service, events, tourism, airlines, hotels, restaurants. It's a pity what's going on, and I'm afraid of the time that we'll need for us to gain confidence again to use the service sector. So it's a sector that definitely will need the help of society and governments. Also a problem with the industry. So most goods that you don't need to buy in these situations of crisis, you postpone the purchase of these items, and then of course the sales go down, and you also create a big damage to this industry. In Brazil, we had a huge problem with the sugarcane business because it produces sugar and ethanol. And ethanol, you've seen what happened with the prices of oil, and also with the isolation, the consumption dropped a lot. And this brought down the prices of ethanol, brought down the prices of sugar, because they are linked to each other. And the industry is facing a huge crisis at this moment here in Brazil, needing support of the government in terms of credit, in terms of putting more taxes over gasoline to try to keep this industry running in these tough times that we have here. Another one that suffered is the corn ethanol. Here in Brazil, several projects that were designed and just starting to be built were postponed. And we have in the US the same problem that we had here in Brazil. So when you see gasoline consumption going down, in the US 10% of ethanol is blended through gasoline, so the ethanol also goes down. You shut down the facilities that are producing ethanol, and then what are you going to do with all this corn? So the US uses 140 million tons of corn towards ethanol. Where this corn is going to go if we don't come back with the consumption of gasoline? So it may depress even more the prices of corn, and also interfere negatively in the prices of soybeans, because the planting decision in the US may change because of the corn issue. So it was a disaster also. The flour business, we've seen very sad images from Brazil, from the Netherlands. You know, the flour business, they have mostly the channel, the supermarket channel, and then the events channel. And the events were forbidden all over the world, so there's a huge destruction in this industry. Probably the one that will have the highest share of destruction will be the flour business, because the supermarket channel cannot absorb what was destined for marriages, for churches, for all types of events that uses a lot of flours. Rubber also is suffering a lot because the factories that uses rubber are closed. So we have a crisis in this industry here in Brazil. Cotton also facing challenges because cotton competes with oil, the artificial fiber and natural fiber, and oil prices came down. And you also have the clothing industry closed because of the isolation policies. So this is bringing a problem for the cotton chain also. And then we can talk about leather, furniture, wood, and all other types of agribusiness products where you have the consumption postponed because of the crisis. So people won't postpone their food consumption, but some things they send more to the future. And now you have the industry suffering because these supply chains, they are strictly coordinated. And when you have this type of crisis, you start having losses in several parts of the chain. We have to understand that also chemicals, fertilizers, because of the devaluation of the currency in Brazil, they got much more expensive for farmers, and also the cost of feed for the meat industry got more expensive with the devaluation of the currency. And I really think that to finish, we will have a cost increase in our chains. Why are we going to have a cost increase? In the mid and long term, I think the sanitary regulations will get tougher to produce because we're having a sanitary issue in the world. So I think the level will come up in terms of sanitary regulations in the world, complicating more the life of our food and agribusiness chains. And at this moment, there's a lot of measures being taken to adapt the operations, to reduce the possibility of have people contaminated. So I'm following very close some industries here in Brazil, slaughterhouses, sugar mills, and it's incredible the efforts that they're doing and how their costs are increasing because they have to keep people away from each other. They have to let the people that are older at home, but these older guys are the ones that understand how things work. So we have a lot of small logistic issues going on, operational issues going on. Companies are taking care. They are, until now, are being able to supply, but we have to remember that their cost is going up. So this was a kind of a glance after 1 month of isolation that we see going on in the Brazilian food chains. Part of my comments were also international. And again, the objective was to make your understanding, your decision process easier after what we saw. In the future depends on the amount of time that we're going to stay isolated. Because if this amount of time is longer, we're going to have more damages to the ones listed on the right side, and we may have some positive events for the ones listed in the left side, but I don't believe. So I think now our policies will be to deal and to start, let's say, making more flexible the isolation policies, calculating the risks and returns. So the activities that bring a higher return in terms of the economics of a certain country and have lower risks of contamination will be the ones, or should be the ones, released to start working back again, but this is the situation. So I've never seen something in my life like that, such a environmental change as I saw in the last 30 to 45 or to 60 days. But I'm positive towards the future of our industry, and I'm also positive towards the changes in our behavior. I will come back in another video to show what I think will be the most important changes in our behavior, but I think we are going to get out of this crisis better than when we entered. And if we, with our help, with our solidarity, raising again the business that suffered more, I think again we may get good lessons from this virus. Thank you for your attention.